My title, as you can see here, for this talk today is called Spiritus contra spiritum. I think in the title on the announcements, I said question with a question mark. Is Spiritus contra spiritum the solution to alcoholism? Question mark. In other words, we're going to talk about. This is actually one of my favorite things to talk about, or maybe not favorite, but what I think one of the most valuable and important things to talk about, both in my professional work and also, in my personal recovery and sharing with other people in recovery, this fascinating story about Carl Jung. I'm going to make this bigger here. That's Carl Jung on the left. He's like, you've heard of Jungian psychology, one of the founding grandfathers of psychoanalytic psychiatry. He and Sigmund Freud were sort of the two big top dogs in the beginning of this. Carl Jung, big dog in the psychiatry world, right? Over there on the right is Bill Wilson, the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. And my talk today is about this fascinating little story about how these two guys' worlds converged, a unique interaction that they ended up having. And as the slide here says, Jung actually made a significant contribution to the formation of Alcoholics Anonymous. And again, it's a story, it's recounted in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's the textbook for the AA program. And sort of buried in the initial first pages there is this story about Carl Jung, a patient, and some work that he was doing with a patient. That's the main story I'm going to tell here today. But before I get into that, I'm going to go ahead and put this in context. I'm going to share a couple things to sort of set the stage for the importance of why we're talking about this today. So first of all, I'll share this with you. I have a YouTube channel, and it's not a big channel. I don't get a lot of traffic. I put videos up there and hardly anybody watches them. But I do have this one video that I don't know how the algorithm works, but for some reason, this video continually gets pushed out there and it gets a lot of views. And more than just a lot of views, it gets a lot of comments. And none of my other videos get comments, but this one gets a lot of comments. And I'll also add this, none of them are positive. Okay, where's he going with that one? Am I proud of that? I'll share with you the title of this video is, in quotation marks, a statement. The title is, I'm drawing a blank. What's it? AA's Not For Me. And then the subtitle is Some Straight Talk About 12-Step Recovery. AA's Not For Me. Some straight talk about 12-step recovery. That's my video that gets a lot of views. And it's a short little video, but my main point in there is I'm drawing attention, calling attention to the fact that AA, 12-step recovery, obvious, sort of a lightning rod, right? People either love it or they hate it, and it can be pretty popular to bash AA and say that AA doesn't work. And my point in there, one, is just to acknowledge that. Yep, it's a lot of people, will say that AA doesn't work, and one of the things I mentioned, I bet some of you could guess here. One of the first objections or the most frequent objections you hear to people who don't like the 12-step recovery approach is the spiritual aspect of it or the religious aspect of it. I'll say, the most common, I don't like the God thing. And I'll acknowledge one of the things we're going to show in here today is that technically AA was developed and they sort of wrote into it so it doesn't have to be a religious thing. You don't have to believe in God, or they say God as you understand him, and it's supposed to be really neutral as far as, they say a doorknob can be your higher power. The Coke machine can be your higher power. And I'm the first to admit that while that is how it's supposed to go, it doesn't always come off that way. The big book of Alcoholics Anonymous looks very religious. It says, it has statements, our purpose here is for you to find God. And I can understand how some people could be sitting in a meeting and go, see, I don't believe in God, or I don't want that God thing. And so, but my point in that video is they'll end up then saying the program doesn't work. And really, maybe one of the points that I make in here, and this is what sort of brings out the haters, is I suggest that it might not really be the reason that people bash AA when they say it doesn't work, because I sort of subtly, maybe not so subtly, suggest that maybe a lot of people haven't really worked the program the way that it's suggested to its full extent, and that sometimes some of these excuses, it's occult, especially the religious as, can be convenient to avoid just doing the work. And I don't want to bring out the haters here. I'm just saying that that's what I've said in that video. If you want some fun, go find that video on my YouTube channel and read the comments, and you can see what I mean. But it brings up the more important point for our talk here today, is that it is a valid thing I sometimes tell people, I understand if I dropped into an AA meeting from another planet, and some of the things that I heard, talking there, sometimes I might not know whether I'm in church or an AA meeting. And like I say, technically it's not supposed to be that way, but it ends up being that way. And it's a valid concern for many people. But this Jung story that we're going to talk about today is so valuable and important to hear. Take it a little bit further on where this whole talk about the spiritual aspect of recovery came from. So now I'm going to also share one other point here to set a little more context here. And that's, if you tuned in last week and saw my first installment of this Wednesday Woo, and if you haven't heard that talk, you can see it on in the group page. It's called, the title of that talk is My Really Awesome Val Kilmer Story. So you can go find that. I'd invite you to go listen to that also. And in that talk, I used the Val Kilmer story to basically share my experience of, one, I started off in recovery. I went to school, became a drug counselor. I didn't work a solid recovery program, and I ended up relapsing after I had begun working in the field, the addiction treatment field, and I ended up back in rehab again. And I talked for the rest of that talk more specifically about how what happened for me the second time around in recovery was coming to understand the importance of this spiritual aspect. And in that talk, I focused on giving the history of the work that I ended up doing for the last 30 years in treatment, helping other people grow spiritually, or helping people have or find the spiritual experience. And today, I'm going to sort of use that as a starting point, again, back to when I was in treatment, coming out of a relapse and realizing how much I didn't understand about recovery because I didn't work a solid program. I became a drug counselor, and I thought I knew everything. I was learning more in drug counseling school than those people in the 12-step programs. And so I didn't work any kind of recovery program. And so when I came back from, and I will say that during treatment, I got lit up with the spirituality thing. I had some pretty intense things happen. I got excited about spiritual growth from the beginning while I was in rehab as the relapse drug counselor. But that I came back from rehab and began my recovery again and finding out how much I didn't understand about recovery. And so to give you an example, I remember reading one day out of the AA Big Book, there's a sentence in there that says, it's right after they've been describing the disease of alcoholism, and then it starts a new chapter and says, if you relate to what we've been talking about in this previous section, there's a sentence that says, you may be suffering from an illness that only a spiritual experience will conquer. And I remember seeing that sentence and paying attention and go, whoa, take that at face value. They're saying, this is maybe an illness that only a spiritual experience will conquer. It doesn't say you're suffering from an illness that only the 12 steps of recovery will conquer. Or it doesn't say you're suffering from an illness that going to treatment will conquer, or the right medication will conquer. It says you're suffering from an illness that only a spiritual experience will conquer. And I was trying to take everything, seriously this time and paying attention. And I thought, also, in my history, as I'd already been working in the drug treatment field, and they're saying spiritual experience is the solution to this illness. And I thought about in the treatment center that I worked at, my first job, how much did we focus on spiritual development in the treatment program? This was back in the 80s, the early 80s, and it was a hospital. The extent of the spiritual program in that treatment program, 1 hour a week, we had a group called Rap with the Chap. The hospital chaplain would come in and give a talk on maybe religion. I don't know. Maybe I don't remember. But that point being, that was the extent of it. And I was reading this sentence saying, the solution to this thing, the only thing that's going to conquer this is a spiritual experience. And I started, I was catching on. How do you order one of those things? How do you get a spiritual experience? And it was at that time that I, sort of realized, well, I don't know how you make somebody else have a spiritual experience, but I'm going to focus on that as I returned and eventually got back working in the field. I'm going to focus on helping people see if they can come up with that spiritual experience piece. So that's now I'm going to diverge from last week in the Val Kilmer story. I went on and I talked about all the woo-woo kind of things that I ended up getting involved with in working with treatment clients and helping particularly young people in treatment have spiritual experiences. But go listen to the Val Kilmer story on that one. Here, I'm going to diverge over to, now we're going to talk about this section in the AA book that talks about Carl Jung. And the story goes, it starts off, it says, a certain American businessman was floundering. He was going around getting treated by all the best doctors and not having any luck with his alcoholism. And it says he ended up going over to Europe and he got in to see the world famous, like the top dog, Carl Jung. He got to be a patient of Carl Jung. And it says that Jung worked with him for a while and he ended up getting drunk again. And he went back and he went to Carl Jung and he said, why can't I get this? What's wrong with me? And I'll switch my slide here. The guy's name was Roland Hazard, as you see here. I'll go ahead and make our slides a little bigger here. Carl Jung said to him, you're hopeless. And he said, I've been trying. He said, the bottom line is, I've seen alcoholics of your nature, and they have very little chance for success. He said, the only people that I have seen recover from alcoholism have what I call, and here he used the term, vital spiritual experiences. And he used a couple other terms. He said a complete psychic rearrangement. Something happens for them that gets them, that completely rearranges how they see things. There's some words around recovery literature. Our whole attitude and outlook on life has changed. That's what he's talking about, an entire psychic rearrangement. He said, I've been trying to create that for you, but I'm not having any luck. You know, when I describe this, I think of what we're talking about here is the near-death experience. The Jimmy Stewart in It's a Wonderful Life movie. You know, he drives his car in the river. He almost drowns. We see the light. We go to the light, and we find out not time yet. He can't come to the light yet, and he comes back. But because he saw the light and he's got this second chance in life, now he was a jerk before he went into the water. Near-death experience, sees the light. Now he's not a jerk anymore, and he goes around, and everybody's, what happened to whatever his name was in there? Now he's nice. Or it's the same thing. It's the Christmas story, Ebenezer Scrooge. He has the vision, the ghosts of Christmas past and stuff, and he changes. His whole attitude and outlook on life changes. That's what Jung was saying to Roland Hazard. He says, that's what happens, and the only thing, you got to have something like that happen to recover from this alcoholism. Now, he used the term spiritual, and he suggested to him, the only suggestion I have to you is maybe get around religious folk. It's a spiritual thing that happens. Again, right there, we'll say, he didn't say go get ordained, go get baptized into a specific religion. He was using the term spiritual, and we're going to talk about that in a second here, the difference between spirituality and religion. But he was using the term spiritual. It's a spiritual thing that happens to you. My only suggestion is go get around some people that have religious folk. So here's how the story went. Roland goes back to the States, and he joins this organization called the Oxford Group. Now, I'm not an expert. Some of you know more about this, the history on this, exactly what the Oxford Group was. But my understanding, it was sort of a religious-based organization that had principles that they practiced, and they used it for betterment, self-betterment, I think. And I think people were using it to overcome alcoholism in the Oxford Group. And there was also a guy that Roland met in the Oxford Group named Ebby Thatcher. Now, people familiar with the history of Alcoholics Anonymous are going to know the name Ebby Thatcher, because later on in the AA book, where Bill Wilson writes his story, he talks about when he was in his bottom of drunkenness, and his old friend, old drinking buddy, came to visit him, and that was Ebby Thatcher. And he recounts that meeting with him, and Bill is so taken by the fact that Ebby looks different. He's sober. He's been sober for 6 months or something like that. And Ebby's like, or Bill's, fascinated. How did you do that? He said, my God, if this guy can do it, maybe, I don't know if I could do it. But he says to Ebby Thatcher, how did you do it? How did you overcome the bottle? And Ebby says, I got religion. And then it says in the AA book, Bill's response was, oh, great. Here it comes. I'm going to get, evangelized too here. And Bill was not keen on that. And he had his defenses up, and he goes, okay, now we got a religious crackpot going to try and save me here. And he let Ebby know that he wasn't real keen on the God thing. But then Ebby uttered the words that was probably, you could end up saying, this is the sentence that we maybe wouldn't be here today with the 12 steps as an effective tool for recovery had he not said this to Bill Wilson sitting at the table. Why don't you choose your own conception of God? And that sort of worked for Bill. And you could end up saying the rest is history. Then Bill Wilson ended up meeting Dr. Bob, and they got together and they figured out that helping other alcoholics is how they stay sober themselves. And they were definitely committed to that. The spiritual principles is important to this. And the bottom line is Alcoholics Anonymous got formed, got underway, and it took off with really remarkable growth. It was very successful. And, today, the 12-step program, all sorts of programs have branched off from Alcoholics Anonymous, and the 12-step process is in my view, a very effective self-help tool, plan of personal growth. We'll say a little bit more about that at some point here today, probably. But the point being is that after about 20 years, AA spread all over the world. Hundreds of thousands of people got sober in AA. One day, Bill Wilson decided to write Carl Jung a letter because he was aware of the Roland Hazard story. And so he wrote Carl Jung a letter. And he said, I don't know if you're aware. AA, you've probably seen, has taken off and it's helping lots of alcoholics. And I'm not sure if you have any idea of the significant contribution you made by when you told Roland Hazard that he was hopeless. I'm realizing right now, I usually play that up a little bit more, because I'll go back to that. I got on the It's a Wonderful Life near-death experience. There's a line in the passage where Jung was telling Roland Hazard that he was hopeless. The greatest psychiatrist in the world, his hopes were up as high as they could be. If I got a chance, it's here. And to hear the great Carl Jung tell him he was hopeless, there's a sentence in there. It says, our friend felt like the gates of hell had clanged shut on him. And that's what I try to emphasize. Feeling like the gates of hell had clanged shut on him. Feeling the lowest of the low. It doesn't get lower than this. Carl Jung says, there's no hope for you. That's demoralizing. Last week I talked about that. Bill Wilson described the recovery process as ego deflation at depth, followed by a spiritual experience. And again, we're focusing on all last week. I talked about the spiritual experience. Here's the ego deflation at depth part, the near-death experience that opens the door to the spiritual experience. It's a two-part process. Ego deflation at depth, that's feeling like whale dung at the bottom of the ocean, hitting bottom. It's not pleasant, but it's a critical, valuable experience for us to go through to recognize just the depths that this illness of addiction can bring us to in this case. So if we fast forward then, again, Bill Wilson telling Carl Jung, you telling him he was hopeless, planted the seeds for this whole thing. And here's the fascinating thing. Carl Jung wrote Bill Wilson right back. Bill Wilson got a letter from Carl Jung, and it said, and we've got copies of the letter. You can go online and actually read the handwritten letter. And it said, I am so glad you reached out to me. I always wondered what happened to Roland. And he said to him, there was so much I wanted to tell him, but I didn't think he could understand. And so it says here, one of the sentences from his letter, how could one formulate such an insight in a language that is not misunderstood in our days? That's some pretty flowery language from the great Carl Jung. But he was telling Bill, there was a lot I wanted to tell him, but I didn't think he would be able to understand. But I think you, Bill Wilson, might be able to understand. And I'm going to share that with you. Now, I'm going to hit the brakes for a second, and I'm going to go back to last week when I was opening my talk on where I said, I'm going to pull back the curtain and talk about a lot of far out, woo-woo, magical kind of things, experiences that I've had working with spirituality and with, in particular, young people in treatment. That was the topic last week. And whenever I talk about that, I open that talk by putting out this premise. What's the difference between a mystic and a schizophrenic? I'll throw out there. And people, I don't know where he's going with that. And I'll say, the mystic knows when to keep his mouth shut. And we let that sink in. And when I give this talk, I have another slide where I sometimes say Carl Jung was perhaps an example of knowing when to keep his mouth shut. The implication of that statement is that sometimes the border between quote unquote crazy, I really am not even comfortable saying that, but to make that more formal and sophisticated and respectable, because I don't like referring to crazy. Another way of saying the same thing about the mystic and the schizophrenic. Joseph Campbell once had a quote, "A mystic swims in the sea of the unconscious. The schizophrenic is drowning in it." And what that's implying is that the realm of spirit, the spiritual realm, and what am I trying to say? The realm of spirit and craziness, lunacy, not in touch with reality, is possibly a very fuzzy line, ambiguous line, and that mystics experience things that could sound crazy if they articulated it. That's the main point. And so again, sometimes there's things that it wouldn't be right to talk about because other people couldn't understand. And so what I suggest that Carl Jung was saying to Bill Wilson at this point was he wasn't, I wanted to say a lot more to him, but he would have thought I was crazy. But Bill, I'm going to take a chance and I'm going to tell you what I wanted to say to him. And he said, I think that the alcoholic's craving for alcohol is equivalent on a low level of the spiritual thirst of our being for wholeness, expressed in medieval language, the union with God. Jung was saying that he thinks the alcoholic's craving, and I think we can apply this to addiction in general, our desire to change how we feel he's on the equivalent, is the same thing as our desire for spiritual connection. That's what Jung was saying. He thinks that through alcoholism, through drug addiction, think that we're satisfying. We're trying to satisfy this desire we have for spiritual connection. And then, check this out. He went on to say, you see, alcohol in Latin is spiritus, and you use the same word for the highest religious experience as well as for the most depraving poison. I'm going to stop right there and comment on that before we read that last sentence. The same word in Latin is used for alcohol as is for what he says here, the highest religious experience. And so to clarify, well, we'll talk about alcohol first. Alcohol, the most depraving poison. If we delve into it a little bit more, we'll see that the word, the word alcohol comes from an Arabic word, al-kul, and that translated literally to body-eating spirit. They saw it as it deadens the senses, a body-eating spirit. Our English word ghoul comes from the Arabic word al-kul, body-eating spirit. And when you think about alcohol, I was going to say this at the beginning, I forgot to say this one. My whole reason for it came up with giving this topic today, I was talking with a group of recovering people the other day, and somebody mentioned, why do you think they call alcohol spirits? And another guy later on chimed in, he said, you know what, and he is long-term recovery, been around for a long time. And he said, it never occurred to me. They call alcohol spirits. And when I heard him say that, I was like, oh my God, I know what my topic for Wednesday Woo is going to be this week. We got to talk about this because it's valuable to hear this. Why do they call alcohol spirits? Think about this. I used to have a friend, he was a teacher, and he used to describe ethyl alcohol, the chemical construction of alcohol. He would say it's basically the same chemical makeup as jet fuel. And if you took a person's liver out and put it on a table and you poured alcohol on it, you would see it dissolve the liver. It eats into the flesh. But more so, think about spirits. You know, the word spirits, mineral spirits. What are mineral spirits? Turpentine, paint thinner. It's something that gets in, it seeps in, it consumes, it gets all the way in the cracks, and it dissolves. It comes in, consumes, fills us. That's what they were describing as alcohol. Something, and I think they're talking about addiction, really. What is addiction? It comes in, it takes us over, it consumes us, and it dissolves things. But then the same word is used to describe the highest religious experience. And so you might think, okay, spiritus, does it mean that means spirit, Holy Spirit, God? Not technically. Technically, the word the Latin word spiritus translates to breath. Think about that one. And what's the beginning in life in the Bible? God breathed life into man. And so it's that sacred breath of spirit is what's referred to. And so now think about this. The spiritual experience, the religious experience, the highest religious experience is the breath being consumed with the breath. The breath of spirit comes in, consumes us, takes us over. We are filled with it. And so here all of a sudden you see, if you're not watching this on video, I'm putting my hands out to illustrate two ends of a spectrum. Two ends of a spectrum of the most depraving poison and the highest religious experience on the same plane. And this final sentence here that Jung said, the helpful formula, therefore, is spiritus contra spiritum. Let me see what my next slide says. Spiritus contra spiritum translate to spirit against the ravages of spirit. Jung was suggesting, Roland Hazard wasn't quite ready to hear this, but what he wanted to say is, I see this as the two of the same thing, flip sides of the same coin. The highest religious experience, the spiritual experience, is what's going to solve the problem. You have been consumed by the addiction, and it's being consumed by the other end is what's going to solve that experience for you. What do I have here? Okay, so that's I have found being able to share that with clients in treatment over the years, when you say, what is it that you're trying to achieve through your addiction? And again, putting this term spiritual experience in context, it's not about, when you come into a 12-step program, I don't think that it's necessarily you have to find God. It's helpful to understand what this spiritual experience, something that comes in and fulfills us. It's a feeling. Some people end up getting to some sort of spiritual belief system that maybe a God, or something fits. A lot of people will come, well, it's nature, that type of thing. The important thing is it's about something that fulfills us. And I've just known that it's had a big impact on a lot of people that I've worked with over the years in helping to understand that. And even in the most general, I work a lot with young people, and when I tell parents this, here's what they're trying to achieve. They're just trying to change how they feel, and they really want something good. They just get off track. So I'm going to shift gears here. And remember when I said I came back as a relapsed drug counselor, and the gears I'm going to shift, just to give you a heads up. We're going to look at a song that I wrote and that describes this. We're going to see a musical portrayal of this concept here in our next section. And so, again, to go back to put this in context, I was an unemployable drug counselor, a relapse drug counselor, and I thought, what am I going to do, for a living, or what am I going to do those first couple of years before I got back into working in the field? And I'm a musician, and I decided I'm going to write a rock musical that tells the story of addiction and recovery. And so I started putting together stuff, and I actually pulled songs that I'd written. If I'm telling my story through addiction, I've been writing songs all my life. I should be able to go back and find some songs that describe different parts of my story. And I did that. And I wrote a few new songs to hit some specific parts. And then over the years, as I got back into working in treatment and I ended up owning my own treatment program, I turned this rock musical into I turned it into a treatment curriculum. Every song is used to study a specific aspect of the addiction recovery process. And I would do stage productions, rock musicals with kids in treatment. And we'd have the band and we'd have acting, and we would put on these performances. And so, it's called The Journey, a musical story of transformation. And so I'm going to show you one of the songs during what happens is the storyline that's played out. There's songs in between, and then there's acting scenes that show the real life portrayal of what's going on through these songs. And so it shows a lead character, starts off in childhood, and it gives a happy and innocent childhood, but then there's family problems, and it shows how as she grows and gets into teenage years and she starts getting off the path, and she's finding herself, but she's finding herself on the wrong path and that type of thing. And this song that I wrote called All That I Can Do is the hitting bottom song. And this is the darkest part of the process in this play, the story, the arc, I think they call it arc, of everything's falling apart in her life, and her family has thrown her out, and her friends have turned their backs on her, and she's got nowhere to go. And so while this song is playing, she's wandering around the stage in the dark, and I think what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to play the song. I'm not going to pick up a guitar and play it. I'm going to play a video of it. But we're going to watch this song, and you'll see the lyrics in the song are on the video. And one of the things that I'll invite you to do is pay attention to the lyrics. And when I'm working with this, like in treatment groups, I have people write down what lines stand out to you and how do you relate to this song. But let's go ahead and take a listen to this song right now, and then we're going to talk about exactly where this fits in this spiritus contra spiritum dynamic.
Don't know why I do the things I do. Can't believe all the ways that I've hurt you. I know it's not right, but it's what I always do. Funny, but it's true. It's all that I can do. Changes in me. I can do to keep from feeling this pain. Everybody trying to tell me what is wrong with me, but what I hide inside they'll never see. Leave me alone, just get away. Everything would be okay if I could just get away from me. Seems I never really know what to do. There's a hole in my soul where the wind blows through. Fill me up, make me feel brand new, like only you can do. Feel like I can't go on. Little voice inside me says I've got to be strong. Just keep doing all these crazy things I do. Crazy, but it's true. It's all that I can do. All I can do. It's all that I can do to keep from feeling this pain. It's all that I can do.
Okay, so if we go back to our play, picture this play on a stage, and you know, two of the lines that says on this slide, don't know why I do the things I do. That's the first line of the song. That's step one of the 12-step program. Powerless. I do the things. I think this is a line out of the Bible. I'm not a Bible scholar, but I think somebody in the Bible said, I do the things I shouldn't do, and I don't do the things I should do. I think that's sort of the human condition in general, but boy, does that describe addiction, right? That's the powerless part of step one. Don't know why I do the things I do, but you can see this song is a fairly dark song. This is about hitting bottom. This is Roland Hazard with Carl Jung telling him, dude, you're hopeless. The girl in this play is hitting bottom, and that's how she's feeling at this moment. And if you look at this picture below, she's sitting on a park bench, and during that song, a drug dealer comes and she does a little drug transaction, and she's got a joint in her hand. And you saw that in the video. Right when it gets to the point of it says, "Fill me up, make me feel brand new, like only you can do." And you can see her, she's holding that joint in front of her face. She's saying, "Fill me up, make me feel brand new. I want to feel brand new, like only you can do." I am going to suggest that at that moment, she's stuck between, on one hand, she knows the good person that's inside of her. She knows what she wants to be. She knows what she's capable of being. She dreams of the day that her family is proud of her, because she really does want to be that person. And at the same time, she knows she can't get away from that joint. She knows what that joint is doing to her, and she knows, as bad as many times, I'm not able to stop. And check this out. We're going to go back to our friend Dr. Jung. He had another premise. He called, this is a Jungian thing, transcendent function. Here's some highbrow psychoanalytic talk. A psychic function that arises as a result of tension between opposing concepts. What Jung said is that sometimes we can have two ideas that both make sense, but together they don't make sense together. They're opposite. Each one in and of itself makes sense, or I can understand, I can get my head around it, but they don't fit together. They don't work together, and we get stuck. And he said it's like a dam we get blocked, and this psychic energy builds up, and sometimes, maybe if we're lucky, a break in the dam occurs. And all of a sudden, boom, I see things differently. And all of a sudden, the two opposing things make sense. And I'm going to suggest that the alcoholic, the addict, hitting bottom, like our girl in the picture here, when she's stuck, fill me up, make me feel brand new, like only you can do. She knows there's a spiritual experience waiting for her that she wants. And at the same time, she knows she can't break free from that addiction which has consumed her and fills her up. And okay, I'll smoke the joint and that makes me feel brand new. She's stuck between those two things. People around recovery circles are familiar sometimes with a phrase we use. Sometimes we have what we call a moment of clarity. I had my moment of clarity when all of a sudden, boom, I see things differently. It might be coming out of the fog of denial. I might all of a sudden see that I could do things differently, and that might be what opens the door to being able to progress through. This might be that archway of ego deflation at depth, followed by a spiritual experience. And my last slide that I'll share here, it says step 12 of the 12-step program. Interestingly enough, it isn't until the very last step of the program that the term spiritual experience comes in. Having had a spiritual experience as the result of these steps. And so pay attention to what that is implying as the result of these steps. It's going through this entire process. And the 12-step, like I said, the 12-step format is, in my estimation, I'm going to go ahead and bring this out and just look at you full screen here. The 12-step process is just a really effective tool for self-help tool. One of the things that I think is so good about it, it continually makes us focus on ourself. and holds us accountable and is long enough to make us put our money where our mouth is. It's got some action things that we have to do, and we got to keep doing it. It's just not a little flash in the pan thing. As a result of these steps, having had the spiritual experience, and some people talk about, even in that big book, because they talk so much about spiritual experience, they put a section in the back, an addendum or appendix, on the term spiritual experience. And they talk about that there's two types of spiritual experience. The blinding light, have a moment of all of a sudden, that's the near-death thing, and all of a sudden my life changes. And it also then lets people know that if that doesn't happen for you, don't think you failed, because that doesn't happen for most people. They have what they call spiritual experience of the educational variety. And that's a long, slow, gradual process of eventually, through lots of experiences and trying something new, and I had some fruit grow here, and I tried something new and I had some more fruit, and eventually we're starting to realize, you know what, this is pretty good. Life's getting better for me. And then we might start having these sort of transcendent awarenesses of, you know what? This whole thing put together is actually pretty cool. And they start realizing that lousy place that I was in, that ego deflation at depth, they see how that fit with this whole process of, if it hadn't have been for that, I may not have even gotten to this place that I am. And then we start having a new way of looking at things. I'm grateful for what happened. I'm grateful for how things have worked out. And we might have a sometimes very subtle, but I'm a big fan of the term finding the sacred in the mundane, of just the day-to-day things, and realizing, wow, life is pretty good. That's me speaking as a recovering person. That's how I look at things. And it's not that I stay walking on water all the time. It's a continual process of having to continue being honest with myself and dedicated to this. It's not a magic bullet. It's just a pill we can take that, okay, I've had the spiritual experience. I don't have to think about this anything more. I just walk on water for the rest of my life. But we come to understand that, the fact that I have to keep at it is sort of part of the deal that makes it so good. So I'm going to wrap that up. We're just about at an hour. To recap, we started off talking about the fact that it's easy to get deterred from any talk about even recovery, because one, AA is so identified, or 12-step recovery is 12-step recovery can easily get identified with the God thing. And there's so much, it's so unfortunate if somebody gets turned off because of that, because as we see, there's more to unpack. We talked about the Carl Jung story of telling the person that he was hopeless, ended up opening the door to allowing this guy to have something good happen for him. And then we looked at the song and saw this powerful image of fill me up, make me feel brand new, recognizing that someone in the throes of their addiction might be suffering in that way. They don't want to be doing this, but they might be stuck, and it can give us a new appreciation for just how powerful this is, what we're achieving or accomplishing through this substance, what alcohol, the spirits, does to us when we drink. It makes us feel good, and we want to feel good. It's just the bottom line is there's an illusion that can be created, and when we think we're finding ourselves or being fulfilled, we're really taking ourselves away from ourselves. And the opposite, the end of that spectrum is the solution, but they are opposite ends of the same spectrum. So I hope this was helpful for you. I'd be curious, if you're listening to this in the future, put comments What did you get out of this talk, or especially the lines of the song? I'd love to see a little dialogue. This video will stay in the community page, and maybe others will watch this, and I'd love to see comments about what lines do people relate to from the song, or just what's your experience in ego deflation at depth followed by a spiritual experience. Well, with that, thank you so much for listening to this. I really appreciate it, and I will see you next week. Bye.